On July 20th, 1969, the entire world held its breath and watched humanity do the impossible. But what none of us saw on our TVs was just how close the whole thing came to being a complete and utter disaster. Seriously, a single, tiny accident almost stranded the Apollo 11 astronauts on the moon forever. So this is the story of the one giant leap we all remember, and the giant lie that has followed it ever since. Picture this. Neil Armstrong is squeezing through the tiny hatch of the lunar module. As he moves, his bulky spacesuit snags on something. There's a little snap. A tiny piece of plastic, the circuit breaker for the ascent engine, just broke off. In the dead silence of space, nobody heard a thing. But that one little piece of plastic, that was their only ticket home. Without it, the engine that was supposed to blast them off the moon would never fire. They were stranded, 240,000 miles from Earth, and they didn't even know it yet.
So while Armstrong and Aldrin are up there, facing a very real life-or-death problem, a totally different story was starting to brew back on Earth, that none of it was real, that the whole mission was just a hoax, a brilliantly staged movie. So what is the real story here? Was Apollo 11 one of the most daring triumphs in human history, or was it the biggest lie ever told?
Okay, let's start with that broken switch, because it's the perfect symbol for all the hidden dangers of the Apollo 11 mission. But to really get a grip on the enormous risks they took, and frankly, why anyone would even think it was faked, you have to understand the bigger picture. This mission wasn't just about exploring. No, this was about winning the Cold War. It was a battle fought not with soldiers, but with rockets and pure national pride. You know, the late 50s and early 60s were just one shock after another for the United States. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. Bam, a satellite in orbit. 4 years later, they sent Yuri Gagarin into space, the first human being ever to go. America was falling behind, and it was that feeling, that urgency, that pushed President Kennedy to make one of the boldest promises in history. I mean, just stop and think about how wild that promise was back in 1961. We didn't have the internet. There was no GPS. The computers that had to guide this mission had less processing power than the calculator on your phone right now. Kennedy was basically telling the nation, we are going to invent the future from scratch, and he put a 10-year deadline on it. No pressure. So with that insane pressure cooker of a deadline, NASA kicked into overdrive and began this frantic sprint to the moon. And believe me, the actual journey of Apollo 11 was anything but a walk in the park. It was basically a series of near disasters, one after another, that they only survived through quick thinking and, let's be honest, a good bit of luck. After the awful tragedy of the Apollo 1 fire, you might think NASA would slow down. Nope. They hit the accelerator. They were launching missions every few months, each one pushing the envelope. Apollo 8 was the first to actually circle the moon, and Apollo 10 was the full dress rehearsal. They flew the lander down to just 9 miles above the surface before pulling up. Every single step was a massive risk. The pressure was unbelievable. And then came the landing itself. And of course, everything that could possibly go wrong did. As the Eagle was coming down, these alarms start screaming, alarms the astronauts had never even heard in training. The autopilot was flying them straight into a crater filled with boulders the size of cars. With only seconds left, Armstrong had to grab the controls and fly the thing manually, like a helicopter, desperately looking for any flat spot to land. This is what popped up on their screen. 1202, a code they had never seen before. You can hear the tension in their voices as they call Mission Control, asking, what does this mean? Back in Houston, some 26-year-old kid in guidance control figures it out. The computer is overloaded, but it's smart enough to focus only on what's important. The call comes back from Houston, go. You are cleared to land. Can you imagine? So, while Armstrong is wrestling with the controls, trying to avoid these boulders, you can hear Buzz Aldrin in the background, just calmly calling out the fuel levels. And then they hit it, 5%. That was the magic number. On the ground, Mission Control started the clock to abort the entire mission. The final countdown begins. 60 seconds, Mission Control says. Armstrong is still flying, still searching. 30 seconds. They have half a minute of fuel left. At this point, you either land or you crash. It's that simple. And then, finally, Armstrong finds a spot. He sets the Eagle down with less than 25 seconds of fuel to spare. A moment of silence, and then the famous call, the Eagle has landed. But hey, they still had to get home, and that's when they finally noticed it. The broken switch for the ascent engine, just lying there on the floor. Their only ticket off the moon was busted. But in this incredible moment of MacGyver-like genius, Buzz Aldrin figures, hey, I don't need the actual switch, I just need to complete the circuit. So he takes out his felt tip pen, pushes the tip into the little hole where the switch used to be, and click, the engine armed. A multi-billion-dollar space program was literally saved by a pen.
And if you want to know just how risky this all was, get this. President Nixon had a whole other speech written and ready to go in case they failed. It's this chilling eulogy talking about how Armstrong and Aldrin would rest in peace on the moon. It's a really stark reminder that success was never, ever a sure thing.
So, when you understand all the very real dangers they were facing, the conspiracy theories start to seem even more bizarre. But look, they've been around for decades, so let's just tackle the biggest claims head-on.
All right, first up, the fluttering flag. The claim is it's waving in the wind, which is impossible on the moon. But the reality is actually pretty simple. NASA knew there was no wind, right? So they built the flag with the horizontal rod across the top to make sure it would stay open. Well, that rod got jammed and they couldn't get it to extend all the way, which left a permanent wrinkle in the fabric. It just looks like it's fluttering.
Okay, what about the missing stars? This one's really just basic photography. The moon's surface and those bright white spacesuits were brilliantly lit by the sun. So the camera settings, the exposure time, had to be set for all that brightness. That means the shutter was open for way too short a time to capture the faint light of distant stars. It's like trying to take a picture of the stars at night from inside a brightly lit football stadium. You're just not going to see them.
Then there are the shadows. People say they point in different directions, which proves there were multiple studio lights. But the moon isn't a flat studio floor. It's a bumpy, lumpy, dusty, uneven place. And when the sun is the only major light source, all those hills and craters and even the dust itself reflect and scatter light in all sorts of weird ways, creating shadows that look like they're going every which way. But honestly, the most powerful piece of evidence against a hoax has nothing to do with physics at all. Think about it. The Soviet Union was America's #1 rival. They were tracking the Apollo 11 mission with every piece of technology they had. If there was even a whiff of a fake, they would have been the first ones to scream it from the rooftops to humiliate the US. But they didn't. In fact, their own official records called it one of the greatest achievements in history. And all this brings up a really big question. If we really did it, why haven't we been back in over 50 years? Well, the legacy of Apollo is complicated. It's a story of incredible success, yeah, but also of absolutely staggering cost.
The price tag was just immense, well over $100 billion in today's money. And critics at the time, they had a point. They asked if that money couldn't be better spent here on Earth, fighting poverty or funding education, especially when the Vietnam War was raging. But here's the thing. That huge investment had these incredible payoffs that nobody saw coming. To build the Apollo computers, NASA pretty much had to invent the microchip industry from scratch. That huge demand drove down prices and kickstarted the entire digital revolution that runs our world today. Seriously, the tech in your smartphone, in your car, so much of it can be traced right back to the race to the moon. So after the last mission, Apollo 17, in 1972, the program was canceled. And for over 50 years, no human has been back. But that is all about to change. NASA's new Artemis program is underway right now, and the goal is to get humans back on the moon, but this time to stay. In the end, the story of Apollo 11 isn't really about a leap versus a lie. It's a story about incredible risk, about unbelievable ingenuity, and about the pure ambition to do something just because it's hard. The mission nearly failed at every single turn, but it succeeded. And in doing so, it changed our world forever. So now, as a whole new generation gets ready to go back to the moon, it leaves us with one big question. What's our next giant leap gonna be?